Welcome back, everyone, to the Dank History Show.
That was bad.
Yeah, it was all right, though.
He's staring at me with tired eyes.
Yeah, well, it's the first time, we're facing each other now.
Yes.
We're just right across the table.
I switched up the mic.
What shape would you call this table? It's
not a horseshoe.
It's like oblong.
Well, it's got little spots. It's got little places to put your hands.
Yeah, well, I meant more like the shape.
But look at that.
It's got a nice curvature to it, wouldn't you agree?
Agreed.
Yes, curvature.
Nice curves.
We like curvy tables here.
Apparently so did the Crusaders.
Yes, so we are talking tonight about the First Crusade, because there were a lot of them. We're going to focus mostly on the First Crusade because there's a lot to talk about these events. So, now, this is a pretty controversial topic in history, and that makes it kind of difficult both to describe what it is, what its effects were, and what it means for us as a society. So, why are they controversial? Well, they're primarily wars that are motivated by religion. At least, the vast majority of them were. And in a post 9/11 world, that alone is going to be triggering to a great many people for a great many reasons. Secondly, we live in a world that often has a lot of terrorism, both from, I'm going to offend some people by saying this, but it's true, both by fundamentalist right-wing fanatics who may or may not, ascribe to some form of Christianity, and, people in the Middle East who may or may not ascribe to certain forms of Islam. So, the subject of religious violence brings out a lot of strong opinions. And in the modern day, there are kind of two dominant opinions that emerge when it comes to the Crusade. The first one is you have people that will define it as some sort of proto-colonialism or an effort by sort of Western Europe to attack and brutalize these Islamic countries. And on the other hand, you have people who try to defend it as some sort of defensive war. So, a lot of different perspectives. I've personally been excited to talk about this topic for quite some time.
And why is that?
Well, I first got interested into the Crusades back when I played a video game known as Age of Empires 2. This was the game for, all you homeschoolers out there, you're staying at home, and you're like, hey, I'm going to play some computer games. And because it's educational, you can get away with playing it and, get it as school credits. So, this is
Yeah, I never got that.
No, not everyone had that luxury, but Age of Empires 2 basically was a real-time strategy game, computer game, where obviously it took place during the Middle Ages, and one of the campaigns followed the Crusades, specifically the third one. But it got me very interested in medieval history, and then I would start reading and watching stuff about it. I watched this one documentary, I think it was Terry Gilliam that did it, who was talking about the Crusades. And then I watched a few YouTube channels about it, and I've also played other games sort of around the same period of time. And it's very interesting because it's such an interesting clash of civilizations that you see. And it's also, people from all around Europe going on this huge journey, crossing thousands of miles when most people barely even left their homes. So it's such an interesting part of history, and one that really, it's so far removed from our own experiences that it's hard to even imagine people packing up and, doing that. So, today we're going to talk about, the context around the First Crusade, since that's the big one and the most successful one. We're also going to talk about some of the context of, Islam and Christianity at the time and some of the theories of war. So, this is going to be a pretty big episode, so strap in.
Seatbelt check.
Yeah. Before we get started, Katie, what do you remember hearing about the Crusades before, I started chattering about it all the time? It's okay if you can't remember.
I don't remember a lot about it. I did read a book when I was a kid about the Children's Crusade, and ever since I was like, what is this? Why? I know I don't like this.
Yeah. The Children's Crusade, for those that don't know, that was an event much later than the one we're talking about, where a bunch of kids decided to try to go off and,
And it
retake the
wasn't
Holy Land.
like they all decided to go. Somebody kind of set them up for it.
Yes.
Some of them had to go for their parents, and some of them had to go for their salvation.
Yes. So, very sad and interesting time. So
That's the only one I actually know a lot about.
that's interesting, because I don't really know a whole lot about that one.
And that was just from a book I read.
That's super interesting. Yeah, there needs to be more books about this time period, because there was not enough. Or enough movies. There's one movie called Kingdom of Heaven, which is known for being so gory.
Yeah, I think I got about I don't know, maybe like a third of the way through, and I was like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I can't.
I mean, I had Orlando Bloom in it.
Yeah, but his hotness kind of doesn't overshadow the gore and the blood and the
That's
guts
true.
and the brains. I'm picturing the brains right now.
Brave.
Guys, I don't do gore.
Yeah, it's okay. We all have our preferences. So,
Your preference. Your preference is gore.
that's not my Yeah, you got me there. I'm a vampire.
You are a vampire.
I've been outed as a vampire.
You
Thank you.
prefer the gore variety?
The Allegor?
The Al Gore variety of gore?
Oh, I gotcha. Al Gore. Bill Clinton's vice president. Gotcha.
We're old.
That's good.
No, I'm just kidding.
Al Gore's still relevant.
He is
isn't
still relevant. He did something with climate change.
Yeah, an inconvenient truth, but that's for another show. That's for the science. That's for the Dank Science Show.
The smelly science.
Smelly. That's a
Doesn't
good
dank
one.
mean smelly?
It can mean. That's one of its meanings. It sort of shifted to more mean like, I guess like cool, but in sort of like a. I don't know how you even describe it. It also used to be used in conjunction a lot with like, that sort of stuff as well.
Gotcha.
But now that meaning's kind of shifted. Kind of like dope or swag.
Dope.
And
Used
swag.
to mean marijuana.
Yeah, and now it
Now
just
it means cool.
And swag used to mean, like a ladies' man, and now it just means like stuff you buy.
Or a swagger.
Yeah. So, context of the world at the time, because this is a very almost foreign world to us living in America in the 21st century. So, in order to tell the story of the Crusades, which happened from the 1100 to 1200s, we have to talk a little bit about the state of the medieval world at the time. And to do that, we're going to have to go way back to 476, when the Western Roman Empire went bye-bye.
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 It got, wiped off the face of the earth by a variety of factors, which I won't talk about now. But,
It'll take forever to get through it.
yeah, with history, the problem with history is you could spend your whole time just going over stuff ad nauseum, because,
I mean, if a whole year is 365 days,
yeah,
you could spend a very, very long time going over everything.
people do that, apparently. Some YouTube channels do that.
Really?
Well, not like every day, but there's like, a video about a week, like this week in history, and they move
Okay.
through it like that. So,
But that's really long.
oh yeah, it's super long. So this left a power vacuum in Western Europe, which were occupied by various Germanic people like the Goths and the Franks. Not the Goth kids today. These were a different group. They might have had edgy music. We don't know. They might have been sad boys. Who knows?
Probably.
But on the eastern side of Europe and the Middle East and stuff, the Roman world really simply continued. The eastern half of the Roman Empire, you might colloquially known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue to rule much of the area, Middle East, Turkey, Greece, and actually under a guy Justinian in the 6th century, it would reclaim Rome itself as well as much of northern Africa. However, there was one big group that emerged in the 600s, and it coincided with the birth of a new religion, Islam. So, Islam, here's the basics. A guy named Muhammad said he received visions in a cave from the archangel Gabriel. Gabriel, who's described both in Judaism and Christianity, where he received revelations which were later written down into a book we call the Quran. Now, the religion of Islam contained many elements that were familiar to Christianity and Judaism, and had many of the same stories, like about Jesus, Moses, Joseph, David, and others. But it did depart from Judaism and Christianity in several ways. It was more Arabic-centric than the other religions, and it didn't believe Jesus was divine. Only Allah was one, so none of the Trinity stuff.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's one of their big thing. It's there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. That's the
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah. Allah is one. Yeah, that sort of thing. It's kind of a take of the praise the Lord your God is one, the Shema prayer.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
that one. So in the 600s, after Muhammad's death, his followers began to branch out and attack and conquer many areas. For example, they were able to defeat both the Byzantines and the Persian empires and conquer a large amount of land. It conquered all of the Persian Empire and a lot of North Africa and the Middle East, although the Romans managed to hold on in their skin of their teeth in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and the Balkans. Another group would actually be able to invade Spain and conquer most of it, forming Moorish Spain, also known as Alhambra. Now, a lot of times people envision Islam as just this big glob, but it was never fully united even from its beginning. And very early on, there were conflicts. For example, this is something relevant for today. There was a group formed called Shia Islam, which, due to a conflict between who should have taken over after Muhammad, and they rubbed up against the Sunni Islams.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Sunnis and the Shias, which we still hear a lot about today.
They're still fighting.
Yes. And, the Sunnis would form like the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Shias would form the Fatimid Caliphate. However, Islam expanded beyond, the Arabic regions to places like Central Asia, where a new group emerged, the Turks. Now, the Turks were a nomadic people, which means, they traveled from place to place, didn't really stay anywhere. And they were skilled in horse archery. You're on a horse, got a bow. And in the 1000...
Dank.
You're pretty dank. That's a very dank skill to have, horse archery.
Is. Marda.
Oh, yeah,
Brave.
Merida. She was a horse archer. That's right.
After I saw that movie, I was like, I'm going to go learn how to ride a horse. And I never did.
Yep.
Or shoot a bow.
Yep. Link can do it in Zelda.
That's true.
Yeah. And he learned it from the Gerudus, who are like, desert.
Basically, no, they're not.
They're nomadic women tribes. Amazons, actually.
Yeah.
Because Amazon, okay, small
I was
aside.
going to say they're the same as Merida, but Merida's from, Scotland.
Yeah, Amazons were described as being lived over near Russia, near the Scythians, and the Scythians were also known for horse archery. So it makes sense why the Gerudus would also know it. Because they're, sorry, that's a big aside.
It's a video game.
But it's based on, myths, based on history.
I know, and he's based off an elf, isn't he?
Yeah, there's this one YouTube channel I watched called Religion for Breakfast that analyzed the religion in Legend of Zelda, and I'll have to show it to you.
There's 3 gods?
Yeah.
The goddesses, and then...
Yeah, and but that's a separate topic. So
we're just going to go down a rabbit hole.
yeah, let's not do a round hole because you got a lot of ground to cover. So these people, the Turks, they came out in the 1000s and they began to conquer many of the old countries like, Iran and other places. And then they came up and rubbed shoulders with the Byzantines. And the Byzantines actually ended up losing to them in a battle called Manzikert in 1071. And then ensuing chaos, a lot of Asia Minor fell to the Turks. Following this, the emperor, this guy named Alexius Komnenos, he sent envoys to Rome, specifically to the Pope, in March of 1095 to ask this guy, Pope Urban II, for help in fighting the Turks. Now, for some context, the church in the Eastern Roman Empire, which it would be known as the Eastern Orthodox Church today, had split over the Roman Catholic Church in 1054 for a couple of reasons. Some of them were the pretty severe ones, like the Eastern Orthodox Church really didn't think the Pope was all that special, and they didn't want to make him, the head figure. And also some very specific doctrines, such as whether the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, or from the Father and the Son, and whether leavened or unleavened bread should be used with communion.
These are things we really need to think about.
Yes, they are. But these can be pretty serious issues, especially for,
They are.
For,
you want to be able to do it right.
Yes. Now, Pope Urban II, since this had only been 40 years ago, he saw an opportunity with this request, both to maybe heal the schism and also do something else. And that would lead to a crusade. Now,
Dun, dun,
here's
dun.
a little bit of context on sort of how Christians of the time viewed violence. So, the first Christians that showed up, 100, like the first century AD, all the way to about the 300s, they were largely pacifistic. They believed that the Christian teachings were incompatible with violence, killing, and war. Although some obviously did serve as soldiers in the Roman army, the general idea was you shouldn't kill anyone. Now, but when the 400s came along and the Roman Empire became, Christianized, Christian thinkers began thinking of the best ways to handle violence. And this guy, known as Augustine, you might have known him for his confessions he wrote, he came up with something we call the just war theory, which it sounds really complicated. All it is he's saying that war can sometimes be just if it's limited in scope, it's commanded by the people in charge, and it's not overly violent, And that's sort of an idea that sort of trickles down to us today. Whenever a nation goes to war, most people don't want it to be, unjust.
Yes.
Now, in the Middle Ages, there started to be a little bit more religiously motivated violence. You had people like Charlemagne who tried to kill the pagans in the 800s. But when the Crusades came along, there was no real theology or teaching about a sort of holy war. So the way they started to think about it was, the way it was sold, was a big pilgrimage, but as John Gree described it, a pilgrimage but with some war on the side.
A pilgrimage with some war on the side.
It's like, okay, we're going to go on it's like you and me, Katie. I'm like, we're going to go on a trip, but we're also going to get out of the car and beat up some people on that trip to get to our destination.
Sometimes you have to.
Yeah, it's like we're going to drive through and we're going to beat up the ferret gang. Yeah, because we're part of the shark gang. We got to beat up the ferret gang on our way to get to, the ferret shrine. So it's like we're going on a journey, but we're also going to beat some people up while we're on it.
As you do.
Yeah.
Anytime you go anywhere.
Yep. So, the First Crusade starts up with Pope Urban II responds to this request from the emperor. As I mentioned before, this idea of hey, I need some help. Send some people to help me. And the emperor likely only wanted to take a few mercenaries from the west, but the pope had a different idea. What if we go, not only help them, but go all the way and take back Jerusalem? Now, you might be wondering, Jerusalem, we haven't talked about that at all, where's this come up? Well, Jerusalem had been, controlled by people who were Muslim since about the 600s, so about 400 years. Now, the reason why Christians in the Middle Ages viewed it as so important is that many of them would take, pilgrimages to go there because Jerusalem, was a site where Jesus wandered around, was crucified. It's also sort of like the center of, Christian religion. And the people during the Middle Ages actually on their maps would put Jerusalem in the very center of the world because this was the most sacred, most important place ever. And even though these people, the Muslim rulers, had ruled it for a while, when the Turks arrived in Palestine, they started to get a little more aggressive. They started harassing a lot of the pilgrims that would come on the journey, and they also allegedly didn't let the Christians enter the city anymore. Whereas before, the people who had ruled it before were happy to pretty much let the pilgrims in because, it brought commerce. It was good to have, people come to your city. Now, there had been a lot of ideas of sort of fighting back against the Turks and Western Christianity, even before Pope Urban II came in power. Like the Pope before him, a guy named Gregory VII. Yes, these guys pretty much all have the same name, in case you're wondering.
They ran out of ideas.
Yeah. Isn't, how many Louis were there, 19 of them?
Probably.
But isn't that...
I'm sure there's more.
But isn't that kind of cool to sort of come from a very long line? You can count the number down. If you were Katie the Ninth.
I'm from an abundance of Catherines.
Mm-hmm.
There are 13 of us.
13.
And I am number 10.
It would be good to be number 10, not number 13. You want to be unlucky.
That's true.
I'm Brad the 4th.
No, you're Brad the 2nd.
Or I'm Brad the 1st, actually, because I'm the first person in my family to have that name.
No, you're the 2nd Bradley Cooper.
No.
You are the 2nd Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper is imposter. He's
a menace.
He's a menace, and he is not the true heir to the throne.
The throne of the Cooper clan.
No. He is a false pretender to the throne.
You are totally the 2nd, though.
No, I'm not Bradley Cooper the 2nd. I'm
you
Bradley
are
Cooper
Bradley
the 1st.
Cooper the 2nd.
Okay, fine. I can be Rocket the
You're
2nd.
Good. Oh, how old is he? 44?
Yeah, he's something like that.
Yeah, you're much younger than he is.
I guess I'm Bradley the second. I guess I'll go with that.
Mahahaha.
Rocket the second.
You were named after the other guy.
Hangover the second. Where
Hey.
are the characters has he been? The guy who stole. At least I'm not the guy who stole Jeremy Irons' book idea.
Oh, what was that one? With Zoe.
Zoe Saldana.
I don't know how you pronounce
Yeah,
her
he
last
got
name.
Rocket and Gamora stole. No, Rocket and Gamora were together, and then Rocket stole Scar's book idea. This is a movie called The Author, by the way, for those who don't know. It's a good movie.
I forgot he was Scar. He was a really good Scar.
He was a good Scar. He was also in the Kingdom of Heaven movie, Jeremy Irons was.
Not as that, though.
So, getting back to the Crusades. So, the guy before Urban, the Pope before them, had proposed a war to help kind of, kick the Turks out. And so this recent turn of events wasn't really spontaneous. So what Pope Urban II did, he called together a Council of Clermont, and he called for Christians around the world to put down their arms against each other and take up arms against, in his words, Turks, heathens, and pagans.
Turks, heathen, pagans.
Yeah. And as a reward for going this mission, you would receive indulgences. Now, what an indulgence was, is it didn't, forgive your sins, but basically it meant you wouldn't have to do penance. Because normally, if you did something bad, let's say, you stole from somebody, or, you said something mean to someone, you'd go and you confess that to the priest, and the priest would then usually give you penance to do, say 7 Hail Marys, or give some money to the poor, or something like that. But an indulgence would allow you to get out of that penance. It would sort of be like, a free penance ticket.
Interesting.
Now, some people might not have drawn the distinction. They might have seen it as almost like a forgiveness of sins or something like that.
And that's why some people did it.
Yeah. So, Urban would use stories of the barbarities supposedly committed by the Turks to get the crowd riled up, much like, how people might do it to gay leaders, and inspired to go fight. And there's one version of his speech they gives where after he finishes, the crowd responded to his speech by all shouting together, Deus vult, Deus vult, Deus vult, which is Latin for God wills it. That is probably the most famous phrase that is ever said about the Crusades. Although, there are some weird things about this speech. First of all, we've got 5 different versions of this speech. All of them written after the First Crusade, so after they'd already accomplished their goal. And only very few of them mention Jerusalem as sort of the final destination. But it's clear that there was a call to go on a holy war. And what this most likely means is that Urban probably thought that Jerusalem was a possibility for this military endeavor, but it wasn't very likely, because it's kind of hard to go all the way from France to Israel. But that eventually became sort of the resounding call of what they wanted to do.
Gotcha.
Now, as to why he did this, Pope Urban probably viewed his opportunity to really stop the fighting between the knights and nobles in Western Europe. Because previously, the Catholic Church had tried to enforce something called the Peace and Truce of God in 989. That sought to restrict wars, such as limiting the days of the week and the times of years people could fight, as well as, prohibiting violence against unarmed clerics and church property, which is why many villages kind of tend to grow around churches, kind of try to stay safe. So, in his mind, this was probably a way of him to, take that violent energy and redirect it towards a foreign enemy, if you know what I mean.
Gotcha.
So, pretty interesting. So, what's very interesting about this is that immediately after he makes this call, almost everyone responds to it. And people from all classes of life. People all the way from a prince all the way to the peasantry. And the first group of people to actually respond was mostly peasants, and that became known as the People's Crusade. And to say it was a mess would be...
It was a mess.
An understatement. So
I love that you put it in all caps.
Mess.
A mess.
So after this, we're gonna have to say many names. I'm gonna keep it, somewhat understandable though. But we gotta talk about these individuals because these are some weird and funny and scary individuals. They are the most dramatic individuals I think I've ever read about.
Dramatic?
These people were drama queens. We'll just say that. So one of the first guys was a guy named Walter Sans Ovar. And he left and arrived in a place called Belgrade with a whole group of, peasants and barely any, people around him. Barely any knights. And the Byzantine governor in charge actually refused him entry because he wasn't expecting them that fast. And he said, hey, look, I got to ask my emperor for permission. So the peasants in this group decided, we're not going to wait. So they pillaged the countryside, likely because they were getting hungry. And then the Byzantines all right, we'll just shuffle you along. Then another guy came along named Count Emiko. This is where things already are starting to get dark in the Crusade, just as a content warning. This was a German guy. He gathered together a group of, soldiers and peasants, and he decided, well, since we're going to a holy war, I think, we should really kill another group of people I don't like, and those are the Jewish people in Europe. So he started, rampaging across Germany, killing a lot of Jewish communities, which, interestingly enough, this was unilaterally condemned by the Catholics. That wasn't what they intended. And a lot of bishops in the areas actually would try to protect the Jewish communities by sort of keeping them in the church or trying to protect them. But Emiko killed a whole lot of them. And when Emiko arrived in Hungary, Hungary actually refused to let them in because they had heard all about all the killings they had done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so they laid siege to a Hungarian capital, and then they pretty much all got slaughtered, the Crusaders. So that was the first branch of the People's Crusade.
Well, that's awkward. So they didn't make it.
No, they didn't make it. And then there was another guy who showed up, and that's a little old man known as Peter the Hermit. He was a little hermit who decided he was going to get together some folks to go on crusade. He gathered together 40,000 people, which included women, children, and the elderly. And he went around, but...
Where did he get 40,000 people?
Well, because the call to the crusade went out everywhere. There was a whole, preaching circuit where, priests and representatives of the Pope would go out into little towns and say, you need to go. And for the common folk, they're like, yes, we want to go.
Well, how did they know where and when they were meeting?
I'm imagining he was sort of a traveling preacher as well, and they sort of flocked around him in a particular area, like France.
So they all just followed him.
Yeah, they all followed him. And they ended up, marching across Europe, and they arrived in Hungary. And things were going okay until there was a just minor dispute over the price of shoes. That then escalated into a fist fight. That then escalated into a riot. And then that escalated into a full-scale battle in this little town.
Over shoes.
Over a shoe.
Well, shoes are valuable.
Yeah. And when Peter's band actually arrived in Belgrade, the Byzantines were like, all right, you need to cross the bridge slowly. We got to get you across slowly. But then they got impatient and they said, we're going too slow. So they decided to attack the city, burn it completely to the ground.
You do. I mean, if they started the fights over shoes, of course you're going to burn a place to a ground.
Yeah, this is a lot of very dramatic people where things just keep on escalating.
Well, okay. Were they running out of food? Were they running out of water?
I would imagine a lot of times that probably was it because they didn't really have something called supply lines, so they pretty much had to live off the land. So that tended to make things a little more, crazy, if you know what I mean. So eventually, Peter and his gang were able to get over to Constantinople, along with a guy named Walter I mentioned earlier, to meet with the Emperor Alexius. Excuse me. And the Emperor told them to wait because there was another group of Crusaders coming, and this was the more organized type. It was being led by the princes. It had a lot more people who were actually trained to fight. And he said, all right, you guys need to wait until the real fighters show up. But Peter said, nope, I'm not going to wait. I want to go, I want to go, and I want to go, and I want to go. I'm impatient. You know how impatient people are, Katie.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So, but as soon as Peter arrived in Turkey, he pretty much lost control of his followers, and they ended up just going on a rampage and then trying to attack the Turks, mostly getting killed and scattered, and of the few captured, the Turks were known to be particularly brutal, so they'd often give them a choice, either convert to Islam or we'll kill you. So that happened, and then the People's Crusade basically petered out, and Peter fled back to Constantinople. So
Awesome.
that was the first wave. Huge mess. Now, so far things have been crazy, but they're about to get even a little crazier once the main forces arrive. And these guys, who are all very interesting guys, were people like Hugh of Vermandois, he was the brother of the King of France, Godfrey de Boulogne, who led the Germans, Bohemond of Taranto, this was
Bohemian Rhapsody.
yeah, Bohemond, he was the Norman Sicilian contingent.
Ouch.
Did you hit yourself on the mic?
I hit my head on the mic.
Careful. A guy named Raymond of Toulouse from southern France, and Robert of Flanders from
Ned
Netherlands.
Flanders' brother.
Yeah.
I made that joke before you did.
That's good. High five.
You were gonna go there.
No, I actually wasn't. I
can't
didn't
reach.
think of that.
My arm is short.
I did
My
not-
arm is short. My arm is short. No wonder he went on the Crusades, and no wonder Ned Flanders is
What's interesting about
conservative. I don't know.
Robert
how to
of
describe
Flanders
him.
is actually probably one of the few that's actually kind of normal out of all these guys.
Well, I mean, after all of this, he was like, "Well, I'm gonna go follow in my brother's footsteps."
And one thing you'll notice about this is this was a very international effort. Like, these were people from all around Europe who went on this. So these people all had colorful histories. Bohemond had actually tried to invade the Byzantine Empire 12 years ago, while Hugh's brother, who was the King of France, had been excommunicated for adultery, and Godfrey had actually fought against the Pope in a war early on. And then the guy named Raymond had actually tried to make himself the leader of the crusade, even though the Pope's official leader was with him at the time. Robert of Flanders was the only person there without some sort of shady history.
That's exciting.
So, when all these leaders arrived, the emperor realized, I can't trust any of these guys. They're all really aggressive. They're all really, ambitious. So I got to find a way to make these guys swear me an oath. So he said, I refuse to let you cross over my kingdom unless you swear to return any of the lands you conquer to me. Now, the Crusader leaders were stubborn. Godfrey tried to start a fight until he got bopped by the Byzantine forces, and he agreed to do it. Bohemond had to be bribed to do it, but he had a nephew named Tancred who was sort of waiting outside, and he didn't have to take the oath, which was intentional. Raymond of Toulouse actually didn't take the official oath. He took a different oath, an oath of brotherhood, which I called brohood. Although he didn't get any treasure because he didn't do the main oath. So the Crusaders eventually are sort of ushered across the Bosporus, which was, the little sea between... You give me a weird look.
I don't know.
That's that little sea between Europe and Turkey, where Istanbul is.
That was once.
Constantinople is Istanbul, Constantinople, been a long time gone, Constantinople, get the works.
That's nobody's business but the Turks.
Which leads us right well to what they're going to do next.
Congratulations.
What's the name of that band that sang that song?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I'll remember it eventually.
We'll have to play it when we go out.
Yep. So, first what the Crusaders did is they attacked the little city known as Nicaea. And they Nicaea. Nice to see ya. That's where the Council of Nicaea was at, where Santa Claus slapped.
Beat a guy up.
Yeah, he beat a guy up. Famously represented in Kirk Cameron's marvelous film, Saving Christmas.
We need to watch that again. It's sadly a tradition in our family to watch.
We watch
Saving
it.
Christmas.
We watch it when we should watch it when we put up our tree.
We do that every year.
It's a beautiful tradition.
Such a bad movie.
But we watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles the night before.
Which is a good movie.
Yeah.
The only Thanksgiving movie that I actually like.
I don't think there are many
No,
Thanksgiving
there
movies.
really aren't.
Unless you count.
Well, no. Charlie Brown.
That's true.
You have to have Charlie Brown.
And the Thanksgiving song, remember it? It's Thanksgiving, giving, turkey.
Oh, I remember that song.
It's by the same guy that did Friday and Chinese food.
Remember when we went to a Thanksgiving party and they were playing it?
Yeah, I
It was
do.
so bad.
That's a bad song.
Oh.
So, transporting us back in time from Thanksgiving to a time when people weren't very thankful. So,
Transition.
So, they took out the city of Nicaea, and the Byzantines sort of swept in and took it back. So, after that, the Crusaders pushed on through Asia Minor and fought a really big battle against the Turks. And the Turks came out at them with their horse archers, so, So obviously they couldn't chase them. So Bohemond had his knights dismount and form a shield wall and to sort of protect the civilians, women and civilians, because there were still lots of common people also following with them, even at this time.
Were there as many as there were before?
There weren't as many, but there were still a lot.
Okay.
There were a lot of just like even babies would be along with them, I'm assuming.
Why would you bring a baby on one of these
People
things?
would bring their whole families with them, because this was sort of like a holy mission.
That's true, I guess.
Yeah. So they actually were able to hold out against the Turkish horse archers after 7 hours, just standing there just with their shields up, which is pretty impressive, I have to say, especially because before that, everyone's shown a significant lack of discipline. So after 7 hours of this, Raymond's force arrived with some knights and slammed the Turkish flank, shattering them. And actually, I was watching an extra credits video and it brought up during this battle, Bohemond probably had the lamest war cry I've ever. It said, "Tonight, God willing, we'll all be rich."
Lame. I was expecting you to do the Wilhelm scream.
No. It's like, that just shows something about this guy, is that even while all this is happening, he's still thinking about all the booty he's going to get.
Doing things for money, it never turns out well in the end.
No, it doesn't.
Does it turn out well for him in the end?
It's iffy. So the Crusaders sort of march their way across Turkey, but while they're doing this, they start taking a lot of casualties because, it's just so hot. They're in the middle of summer, a lot of the water's been, the wells have been destroyed, and the land's been burned behind them. But
they didn't think that one through, did they?
No. Well, they didn't really know where they were going. None of them had ever been there.
How are they expected to do a crusade to Jerusalem if they don't even know where they're going?
I'm assuming they had maps or something like that. Like the Byzantines probably gave them maps, but most of these guys had never really been outside of, France or something like that. So
it sounds like poor planning on their part.
Oh yeah, it was very poorly planned. And there are, 5 people in charge, each with their different motives. But
for that many people and only 5 people?
Yes, but they had a lot of tenacity and a lot of,
gumption?
Yeah, a lot of gumption. And there were no, kings involved. These were all, princes and sort of the people under them.
So no one was sent to do it?
Yeah, no kings or anything were sent. It was just whoever sort of was able to position themselves as the leader of the individual groups.
That's interesting. So it was an everyman's crusade.
Yes, this was a very decentralized act. But the Crusaders slowly made their way to a city called Antioch, which is that's actually mentioned in the Bible as the first place Christians got their name as Christians.
Cool.
And Tancred...
Wow. Full circle.
Yeah. Now, Tancred and Baldwin, they decided to take a path through Tarshish while the rest went south. And through some goonery, there was a battle where Baldwin took hold of the city of it was a city outside of Tarshish.
I love that you spelled Taurus.
Then he refused to let the extra crusaders under Tancred in. Then those crusaders got killed in the night, and everyone was upset at Baldwin, and he locked himself in a room and refused to come out until people stopped being mad at him.
He's like a 3-year-old.
Yeah, and then when Tancred took over...
Are you done being mad at me, Mommy?
Yep. And then when Tancred took a town, he refused to let Baldwin in due to Baldwin being a goon. So Baldwin decided to leave the Crusades, wandered off to Edessa, where he became friends with the king, killed that guy, then took over Edessa for himself and set himself up a nice little, area for himself. So that was that. But
that was that.
But Tancred met up with the rest of them in Antioch, where they were besieging the city. And the siege didn't work very well because the city was really hard to encircle, and they were outside of there for a long time. Bohemond, though, through some trickery, was eventually able to bribe someone inside the city, and the Crusaders captured it and basically killed everyone in it because, reasons.
Success!
Now, things got crazy because as soon as they walked into the city, a huge Turkish army arrived just outside it, and now the Crusaders were being the ones under siege. And the Crusaders got sick, and they were dying, and they didn't know what to do because they were outnumbered. But then, This guy who was a mystic claimed to have a vision from St. Andrew, saying he knew where the Lance of Longinus was buried. The Lance of Longinus was an artifact that was believed to be the lance that had pierced Jesus' side. You remember that story where it pierced Jesus' side and water comes out?
Well, okay. Some of these artifacts, I'm beginning to think weren't real.
Weren't or were?
Were not.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was just somebody's weapon. They weren't just going to give it up.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of these artifacts, like, a lot of people were doubtful about this because they're like, well, we already have something like that back in Rome anyway. But they got digging around. They found a random little piece of the lance, which was probably just someone's weapon. But they claimed that was the Lance of Longinus. But what this did is that as soon as they got that, they got this huge boost of morale.
Huzzah.
And they gathered outside the city, and they charged against the vastly larger Turkish force, just screaming Deus Vult at the top of their lungs. And people would later claim that they would see, like, the saints, like St. Paul and Peter, riding beside them. And the Turkish force even lit fires across the battlefield to try to stop them, but they just kept on coming at them, kept on charging. And they managed to completely overwhelm and rout this much larger Turkish army. Now, the Turkish army was kind of divided among different commanders. That probably didn't help things. But you can see where just this boost of, like, religious fervor just, like, swept across everyone, which is very interesting. Now, immediately after that, you think they would make their way to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem's not that far away.
Right.
Well, no, they ended up sticking around there in months because Bohemond and Raymond argued about who was in charge of the city while nothing happened.
They're acting like toddlers.
They are very much toddlers and very much like, very much drama queens or kings or princes. And Bohemond would eventually won out and said, all right, you can get to keep it. And Hugh, along that time, he got sort of tired about it, so he just left the crusade totally and took a boat back to Europe, for which he'd never live it down. For the rest of his life, he'd be made fun of as the guy who abandoned it. And the Crusaders eventually moved on to a city called Murat. And Raymond and Bohemond, once again, being drama queens, got into arguments about who owned the place again.
Oh my goodness.
And this is where something a little gross happens, just to warn people. While this was happening, the Crusaders were just sitting there getting hungrier by the day, and then they started looking at the bodies, and they're like, let's eat them.
Ew!
So they roasted up some dead bodies and had themselves a nice meal.
How long have they been sitting there?
Probably like a couple days.
Ew. I wouldn't eat a dead cow that's been out for a couple of days.
Yeah. I'm guessing they were just really hungry and like,
I guess.
But this is something that, interestingly enough, that it even grossed out, like, the people at that time who were writing it.
Ugh.
They're like, they started up a big barbecue. Come to Raymond's barbecue.
Cannibalism.
Yep, cannibalism. So.
Yep, cannibalism.
Cannibalism.
You're making it sound so matter of fact.
Yep, just some cannibalism.
Just your run-of-the-mill cannibalism.
Ain't nothing. There is something wrong with it. There's a lot wrong with it.
There's so much wrong with it.
What's a little cannibalism among friends?
They won't be your friends no more. They'll be in your belly.
Belly. Get in my belly.
Ew, literally.
Yeah. So after all this goonery, Raymond decided he was going to take charge, and he had Tancred at his side, and they moved on finally to Jerusalem. Now, by this time, interestingly enough, Jerusalem had actually changed hands between the Turks and the Shia Muslims, the group I talked about a long time ago called the Fatimids. And what's interesting about this is that the Sunni population the Crusaders encountered as they got towards Jerusalem actually tried to help them. Probably because they wanted to, oust the Shias, and also because they also didn't want to get killed and eaten like they had heard other people had happen.
Oh, that's a great way to protect yourself.
Yep.
Eat your enemies.
Yep. And there was actually another form of goonery, because that mystic I referred to who found the lance? Well, a monk got mad at him, and they challenged them to, like, a monk off.
A monk off?
Where the mystic would stand with the lance, and they lit a fire under his feet to see if the lance protected him. And if it didn't, he burned to death, and they're like, yeah, well, that was useless, and they moved on.
Well, that was a waste.
Waste of time. So, they finally reached Jerusalem. Now, by this time, there were only probably about 15,000 Crusader army people left. And that's probably from about 50,000 went. So a lot of people were dead by that point. Now, there was no water there and no real trees, so they needed to find a way to win a very quick victory. They couldn't have a long siege. They had to seize the wall quickly. Now, luckily, some Italian friends, called the Genoese, arrived in boats and gave them some timber so they could build up siege towers. If you ever watched Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, where there's like those big like towers the orcs used. Do you remember that?
Ouch. The ones where they're on it?
Yeah.
They're like pushing themselves?
Yeah, the ones where the trolls are pushing them.
Yeah.
It's like that, except, no trolls.
No trolls!
No trolls. They have
Well,
a
you don't know
cave
that.
troll.
Cave troll.
So they assaulted the walls back and forth, but Godfrey's tower actually was the first to reach the wall. And Godfrey and Tancred themselves were the first to jump out. They took the wall and they opened the gates. And the Muslim defenders broke. And after this is where the most famous, I think, massacre ever happens, because the Crusader forces just go wild, basically killing everyone throughout the city. The chroniclers describe it, and obviously this is hyperbole, but they said, the blood was up to people's, ankles.
Yeah.
Now, Tancred tried to stop the slaughter, but it was really to no avail. And thus, the Crusaders had taken Jerusalem and accomplished their goal. And the Byzantine...
Did they?
They had accomplished their own personal goal. For the Byzantines, who were supposed to be helped, they'd accomplish none of it, because they decided, we aren't giving you any of the land back. And they formed 4 new countries called the Kingdom of Jerusalem, County of Tripoli, Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa. And the Muslim leaders around them didn't really know what to do at the time, and it would take them some time to be able to figure out a way to sort of fight back against the Crusaders. But that's really a whole different story. So, what is the legacy of all this? What does it mean?
Are we just talking about these crusades? The crusades we just talked about, or the crusades in general?
This crusade, but also the crusades in general, just sort of this intense religious violence and, invasions.
Well, that's the legacy.
Yeah.
Violence begots violence.
Yeah, and the Crusades ultimately killed as many people as they claimed to protect. In fact, during the Fourth Crusade, they'd end up, derping out and attacking Constantinople itself. And they weren't able to keep Jerusalem for very long, because they took Jerusalem in 1099. They would lose it in 1187, when a guy named Saladin took Jerusalem.
So less than 100 years.
Yeah. And the Crusader states themselves would collapse in 1291, like all of the land.
So what was the point? That was only 200 years.
Yes. Now, it's pretty significant, though, they were able to accomplish this at all, because these were people without modern logistics, without...
They had no idea where they were going.
They had no idea where they were going.
They ate people off the ground.
Yeah. People who were from all sorts of different nations who had probably never even left their village, all sort of coming together in this huge group.
I would love to have heard the rallying speech.
Yeah.
Because if they could convince a bunch of people from everywhere to do this, it had to have been very persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if you put your eternity on the line,
yeah,
it makes sense.
Yeah, and if you think of it as like, if I go and I die, I'm going straight to heaven anyway.
Right.
Then you're going to be far more likely to do it. And we actually have notes from knights who went there, and they would describe it as like this deep sort of moral imperative that they had to go, and they felt it deep that they needed to go. And when they took up the cross, they took it very literally. They'd sew a red cross on there.
And that's why you're a Templar outfit.
Yeah, they would use that language, tape up your cross and follow me. They would say, all right, take up your cross and follow me.
And they just put it on their chest.
Yeah, put it on their chest.
Put it on their chest.
And what's interesting is that this Crusader spirit wouldn't even die after 1291, because there were all sorts of crusades called all the time. There were ones against the Muslims in Spain, the Reconquista. There were ones against, pagan groups in Lithuania. Those are the Teutonic Crusades, guys with the big horns on their helmets.
Yes.
The actual people with actual horns on their helmets.
Not the Vikings.
Not the Vikings. These were German Crusaders. And when the Ottoman Turks invaded Europe in the 14th through 17th centuries, there were many crusades waged against them. The most recent one we remember is the Siege of Vienna in 1683, where the croissant comes from, interestingly enough.
Ha ha ha.
It was made sort of, I think, it's like a mockery of the Ottoman flag or something like that.
Really?
Yes.
A sweet buttery pastry.
Yeah, because it's a crescent.
That makes sense. But it's so good.
It is good. It's buttery.
It's buttery.
Buttery wonderness. Now, okay, here's my personal thoughts. I don't really think it's accurate to call the Crusade a defensive war because all the people who went were none of the people who were like affected by it.
Yeah.
And they ended up killing just as many of the people who were affected by all this political change as they did helping them, quote unquote.
It was almost a waste. I mean, I don't want to say that word because it sounds like it was for nothing, but it does feel like a waste.
Yeah, I think to the people themselves who experience it, though, like, obviously to the Islamic people, it was like all of a sudden, here's these people coming out of nowhere.
And what was the point?
Now, for the people who actually went, though, and accomplished this, it felt to the rest of Europe like a miracle. Like, look at what we've done. And what's interesting is that after that, for a little while in Europe, even though there's still wars between people, the wars between the people in Europe get a little almost nicer. Like, there's almost like this sort of camaraderie that sort of emerges.
Let's go fight each other as brothers.
Yeah, but, like, because people from all around Europe would often go crusading together. So it's almost like a bonding thing.
Woo! I guess it did bring everybody together, so that was one thing that wasn't a waste.
And what's really interesting about this is that when we look at how the Islamic world responded, they didn't, after the 1200s when they beat them, they sort of really didn't think about it much. But what really started to sort of bring the Crusades back into our own modern perspective is in World War One. That's a long time after this. The British actually took Jerusalem, and people started writing newspapers that said, "Oh, this is the finish of the Crusades. We finally took back Jerusalem." That's how you can actually see that in newspapers, oddly enough.
Ooh.
And in the post-Cold War period, many people, especially in the Islamic countries, started to look at the Crusades as the beginning of the sort of Western interference in their affairs. Like even, famous terrorists like Osama bin Laden would bring it up when he was still alive. Today, the Crusades are still very controversial, and in a world stained by violence, we really got to be careful to learn the lessons of history, because one thing that struck me is how very easy it can be to get drawn into something. Like, these were people from all around the continent, all getting lured into this huge fight, which none of them really knew what they were signing up for. Like, one of the reasons why so many peasants went, from what I've read, is because they thought it was almost they'd arrive and it would just be, they'd be able to just miraculously take the city.
I can see that, especially if you never left a place.
Mm-hmm.
That you probably didn't know how hard it would be.
And also, one big thing is if you look at sort of old medieval like Bibles, the pictures, they often have a lot of pictures in it.
The one with Yoda?
Yes, the one with Yoda. But there's this one where the books of Joshua specifically, they'll always draw Joshua as looking like a crusader, because they really sort of drew inspiration from that book, because, it's going across the Jordan to take all this land. There's all this miraculous miracles that happen in it. So they really sort of drew inspiration from that. And also the Old Testament stories as well, because, the Catholics would preach a lot from that. So that is the First Crusade. It was it's a very dramatic one, and just to clarify, this is the main one that actually succeeds its goal. There will be 7 more.
7?
Yes.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize there were that many.
Yeah. Second one doesn't do a whole lot. The third one is the one with Richard the Lionheart.
Of course.
Yeah, that accomplished somewhat. Fourth Crusade is the one that takes out, Constantinople, because why not? Fifth and sixth ones are like, I think some German stuff happening. Seventh and eighth ones actually take place in Africa. Like, they start to try to attack Egypt.
Okay.
Egypt and Libya and stuff like that.
I thought you meant that they got super lost and ended up, I don't know, South Africa.
Yeah,
So
not that far.
That's how far off they were. This is why you need cartography.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, this is also where sort of the legend of Prester John comes from. Like Prester John and the whole, like, Fountain of Youth.
Oh, yeah.
Because there was this idea of, like, because Ethiopia, way to the south in Africa, was Christianized place. So a lot of the Crusaders thought of this idea that, like, well, there is just going to be this guy named Prester John who's going to emerge from Ethiopia, and he's going to, conquer all the Egyptians, and, we'll join together and it'll be great. So it's a very different period of time. It's something that's almost hard to comprehend.
Do you think there's more holy wars today, or do you think we've all just kind of separated from that?
I think most wars, I don't think, are purely motivated by religion. I think religion can be a factor in it,
Yes.
but a lot of times it's more economic factors. What's interesting about this one is, like, this is one that's not motivated by economic factors at all. I mean, yes, some of the people that went there.
What about the guy who was like, we're going to be rich, men?
Okay, so those guys did sort of think that, let's form out our own land and stuff like that.
Right.
But for everyone else going, it wasn't really about that or about making their nation
So they
great.
were outlier. They weren't the actual
Yes, it
mindset
was
behind everybody.
very much religiously motivated. So yeah, that was the First Crusade.
Oh.
Pretty crazy stuff.
So what are we doing next week?
Next week, we're going to talk about Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims.
I'm a little nervous about that.
Why?
Because, we need to be more sensitive about the Native Americans. And...
Well, yeah, we're going to be more sensitive. When have we not been sensitive?
Oh, no, I know. But, like, as a society, like, there's a thing I read the other day about having the kids make headdresses in school is just not appropriate.
Yeah, it's definitely a little iffy, I'd say.
Well, we'll find out next
Yeah,
week.
we'll discuss about Thanksgiving and, the history, because history is fun. Well, it can be fun for us, maybe not for the people who experience it. But, Anyway, we are the Dank History Show. You can follow us on Twitter